By the time Silas Rourke stepped into the middle of Morrow Creek's main street, the wagon was already coming apart. One front wheel was throwing sparks from the iron rim. A little boy was tangled in the reins with both heels drumming the seatboard, and half the town stood frozen on the porches watching the man they had once driven past the county line decide whether he meant to save the child or let old fear collect its debt. Silas did not reach for his gun. He moved left, then right, reading the team the way some men read weather. The bay on the near side had panic in its eyes and foam on the bit. The sorrel was following terror, not leading it. Silas caught the dangling trace chain on the second bounce, planted both boots in the dust, and let the wagon drag him 3 hard strides before he heaved the lead horse's head toward the watering trough. Wood cracked. The boy cried out. A crate of nails burst open under the axle. Then the whole rig slewed sideways and stopped so violently the harness bells gave one last wild shake and fell quiet. The boy sat there breathing like a trapped rabbit, his face white under freckles. Silas put both hands up slow so as not to scare him worse. "You hurt." The child swallowed and shook his head. "That's good," Silas said. "Climb down when you're ready." Only then did the street remember how to make sound. A screen door slapped somewhere. A mule stamped in the shade. Someone on the hotel porch whispered his name as if it were bad luck tested aloud. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight, and if you feel like it, tell us in the comments where you're listening from. There is comfort in knowing who is riding beside a story like this. Silas tipped his hat brim back with one knuckle and looked at the faces lining the street. Some were older, some meaner, many just tired. He knew the years by what they had taken from people. Mrs. Crow from the dry goods now had shoulders rounded like a woman forever leaning into wind. Pastor Leet had gone white around the temples. Ed Barlow, once broad as a barn door, was bent enough now to study his boots when trouble passed. A few younger ones only knew Silas by story, which was a dangerous way to know any man. Then he saw Nell. She stood in the doorway of the telegraph office with one hand still on the frame, as though she had started forward when the wagon ran loose and forgot to finish the motion. Time had narrowed her face and silvered a strand at each temple, but it had done nothing to weaken the steadiness in her eyes. She still carried herself like someone who had learned long ago that falling apart might be honest, but was rarely practical. The last time he had seen her, she was 28 and crying without letting a sound out. The mob had been behind her, Vernon Pike in front of it, and Silas had ridden away because staying would have meant shooting townsmen he had once sworn to protect. Now Nell's gaze dropped to the raw scrape in Silas's palm where the chain had burned him, and something tightened in her mouth. The little boy slid down from the wagon and ran straight to her. "Aunt Nell." She put a hand on his shoulder. "Joey, I told you not to take Mr. Barstow's team. I was only moving feed. You were only courting your grave." The boy looked back at Silas with the shaky reverence children reserve for the person who kept the world from ending 3 seconds ago. Nell faced Silas at last. "You picked a loud way to come back," she said. Silas rubbed the hoarse foam from his fingers onto his trouser leg. Wasn't planning on coming back at all. That was true enough. He had meant to cross the ridge, water his mare at the creek south of town, and keep riding for Casper. Then he had found the telegraph note pinned under his saddle blanket at the livery in Cross Junction, addressed in a hand he knew even before he opened it. "Come if you've got any charity left in you. I found what should have been found 14 years ago. Tom Barlow." Tom had been deputy when Silas wore the badge here. Later he had become sheriff by the simple arithmetic of age and survivors. If Tom Barlow asked a man for charity, the matter was grave. A shadow crossed the sun, not cloud. Buzzards turning high over the south pasture. Silas glanced that way on instinct, and when he turned back he found Vernon Pike stepping off the boardwalk in a coat too fine for the heat. Pike had ripened with prosperity the way some fruit goes soft before it spoils. He was thick through the middle now, smooth-shaven, vest straining a little at the buttons, watch chain bright as creek water. But his eyes were the same eyes Silas remembered from 14 years earlier when the town bank had come up short. A young clerk lay dead by the vault, and Pike had pointed one gloved finger through the noise and named the man who would carry all of it. "Well," Pike said, smiling as if unexpected guests were his favorite trial, "I had wondered whether hell had finally grown tired of your company." Silas said nothing. Pike glanced at the stopped wagon, the horses, the scrape in Silas's palm. "I'll admit that was neatly done. Trick is, a man can stop one wagon and still remain a danger to a town. Nell's hand tightened on Joey's shoulder. Ed Barlow took half a step down from the porch and no farther. Nobody liked being reminded of who they had been at their ugliest. Silas kept his voice flat. Tom sent for me. He is resting, Pike said. Doctor says he ought not take visitors. Tom don't pay doctors to choose his company. Pike's smile held, but thinner. You haven't any standing here to make demands. No, Silas said. Just questions. For a moment, the only sound was the creak of the wagon settling on its sprung axle. Pike lifted his chin toward Nell, as if dismissing a clerk. Get the boy inside. Nell did not move. Mr. Pike, if Sheriff Barlow sent for him, I expect Sheriff Barlow can say why. Pike turned his head slowly. It was a small thing, the way he looked at her. Not anger. Ownership interrupted. I expect, he said, that this town has endured enough disorder for one afternoon. Silas saw the flicker then, quick as a match scratch, in the faces on the porches. Not courage yet. Only weariness with being handled. It vanished almost as soon as it came. That was the trouble with fear. It made decent people briefly brave and then very practical. He touched 2 fingers to his hat brim, toward Nell. I'll see Tom myself. He started past Pike, and 3 of Pike's ranch hands shifted at once near the hitch rail. One slid his thumb toward the hammer of his revolver. Silas did not look at him. He had learned long ago that men eager to be seen were usually the least dangerous until the first shot. The dangerous ones went quiet. Silas. Nell's voice stopped him. He turned. There's been talk all week of the county receiver coming tomorrow, she said. Men from Cheyenne. Paperwork. That's called in. Tom's been fighting Pike over the South Ditch rights since spring. Pike's jaw set. Nell went on as if she had not noticed. If Tom sent for you, it won't be for nostalgia. Silas nodded once. I didn't figure. He found Tom Barlow in the back room of the jailhouse, propped up in bed with a wool blanket over his knees despite the heat. The room smelled of camphor, old pine, and the copper edge of sickness. Tom had shrunk. That was the first blow. The second was seeing that the old man's hands, once square and sure enough to hold a Winchester steady in a blizzard, now trembled on top of the blanket as though some invisible engine inside him had come loose. Tom squinted, then barked one dry laugh. Damn fool actually came. You wrote like a dying priest, Silas said. I write worse than that when I'm healthy. Shut the door. Silas did. Tom nodded at the chair, and Silas sat with his hat in his lap. Up close, the old man's skin looked like paper left in a hot drawer too long. But the eyes had not changed. They still took a measure cleanly. You look thin, Tom said. You look dead already. Give me till Wednesday. Silas glanced at the locked desk beneath the window. What did you find? Tom worked a hand beneath the blanket and brought out a ledger wrapped in oilcloth, small enough to hide under a coat. He set it on his lap, but did not let go. Found it in the false bottom of the old bank safe after Pike had new shelves put in, he said. Didn't know what I was seeing at first. Water rights, territorial bribes, mortgage transfers, paid riders on 2 separate books. Then I found the page about the payroll robbery. Silas felt the old cold move through him, the one that never quite left. That was 14 years ago. Truth keeps better than milk. Tom's mouth twisted. Pike paid Cobb Renner and Amos Vale to stage the robbery. Clerk boy Milo stepped wrong. Renner fired from the side window. And Pike put your name to the whole rotten business because you'd already threatened to bring his ditch fraud to Denver. Silas stared at the oilcloth packet without touching it. He still remembered the smell of that day. Coal smoke, new-cut lumber, the sour stink of horse sweat from the mob packed shoulder to shoulder in July heat. He remembered seeing Nell at the edge of the crowd, one hand over her mouth, while Pike shouted that a lawman who steals from his own town is worse than a wolf near a schoolyard. He remembered Tom, younger then, bleeding from the temple after trying to hold the jail door against 6 men. And now? Silas asked. Now Pike means to take the rest of Morrow Creek the way he took the first piece of it. South Ditch belongs to the town by original survey. He's called in notes on near every farm that depends on that water. Receiver comes tomorrow to make it look lawful. Once folks lose water, they lose land. Once they lose land, Pike buys it back in one sweep. Tom coughed so hard he had to turn his head. Silas poured water from the pitcher and held the cup while the fit passed. Tom drank, wiped his mouth, and looked ashamed of needing help. I wanted to file it myself. With witnesses. In public. Make the town hear what it helped do to you. Silas leaned back. That town had its chance. Maybe, Tom said. But there's widows in it now. Children. Men too old to start over. Good people made weak by bad years. You know the difference. Silas looked toward the window where late sun had gone copper across the bars. He did know the difference. That was the whole curse of it. I'll take the ledger to the receiver, he said. Tom shook his head. Not the whole thing. Pike's got ears in every stable and saloon. I copied the necessary pages and hid them separate. Where? Tom's smile came slow. Thought you might ask that. In the bell tower at church. Behind the loose plank under the ladder. Silas almost laughed. You hid the town's salvation in a preacher's dust. Safest place I knew. Nobody in this town climbs unless God or fire tells them. Silas stood. I'll fetch them before dark. Tom caught his wrist, weak but determined. Silas. He waited. If you can save them, do it. Don't do it for Pike. Don't do it for the fools we were. Do it because it's still a town. Silas looked down at the old hand on his sleeve. It felt light. Nearly gone. I didn't come here to be anybody's marshal again. Tom let go. No, he said softly. That's exactly why you're the only man I could send for. Silas left by the back door. Shadows had lengthened across Main Street, blue in the wheel ruts. The air smelled of hot dust and yeast drifting from the bakery. He crossed behind the livery, saddled his mare, and rode the short rise toward the church on the north edge of town where the cottonwoods had gone thirsty and brittle along the creek. He never made it to the bell tower. Halfway up the church steps, the first shot cracked from somewhere behind him and took a splinter out of the railing near his hand. The second shattered the glass beside the red-painted door. Silas dropped flat behind a stone horse block, drew, and sighted toward the feed store roof. A hat brim vanished. Another gun flashed from the cemetery fence. Not amateurs, then. Crossfire, high and low. He moved on elbows across the dust, feeling old gravel bite through his shirt. The smell of broken glass and sun-baked cedar filled the back of his throat. A third shooter had to be on the far side to keep him from the church door. Pike wanted something inside badly enough to risk gunfire before supper. Silas fired once at the fence line, not to hit, but to buy silence, then lunged for the sidewall. He got one shoulder against the clapboard just as a slug tore through the sleeve of his coat and burned a line across his upper arm. From the street below came shouting. Boots. A woman screaming for her children to get indoors. Silas flattened himself, then looked up. In the bell tower window, barely visible through the slats, a thin ribbon of smoke curled out and vanished into evening. Fire. He kicked the side door with his heel. Locked. Hit it again. The third blow split the jamb enough for him to shoulder through. Inside, the church was dim and stale and close. Smoke was already pooling under the rafters. Someone had set kindling near the ladder and poured lamp oil over the hymn boxes. He climbed anyway. By the time he reached the loose plank beneath the bell ladder, his eyes were streaming and the back of his throat felt flayed raw. He jammed his knife under the board, pried it up, and found a packet of folded pages wrapped in wax cloth just as the first flame licked across the rung below his boots. He stuffed the packet under his shirt and came down faster than men his age were meant to move. At the bottom, he seized the fire bucket by the door, sloshed what little sand it held over the burning hymnals, and heard the front windows fail in a bright shower behind him. When he burst out the side, coughing black, half the town was in the churchyard, and Pike was there too, directing men toward the pump as if he had not arranged the whole thing. Nell stood near the gate with Joey pressed to her skirt. Tom Barlow's deputy, Cobb Renner, broad and hard-jawed under a sheriff's badge that sat on him like theft, came striding up with 2 men at his shoulders. Gun on the ground, Cobb said. Silas stared at him through smoke. 14 years had thickened Renner's neck and softened nothing else. He was still the sort of man who smiled with one side of his mouth when hurting somebody. Interesting timing, Silas said. Cobb lifted his revolver. Gun. Nell's gaze dropped to the blood darkening Silas's sleeve. She saw more than that. She saw the soot on his face, the half-burned cuff, the smoke clawing out of the bell tower where somebody had tried to destroy what Tom hid. Her eyes shifted once, quick, to Silas's shirt front where the packet made the faintest hard corner. Then, before Pike could read it too, she stepped forward and slapped Joey's hat down over the little bump beneath Silas's coat, as if brushing off ash from the child's brim. It was such a small thing most people missed it. Silas did not. Pike was shouting for water. Church bells could not ring because the ropes above were burning through. A red glow breathed behind the slats. Cobb came closer. "You heard me." Silas lowered his revolver and set it on the ground. That was when the jailhouse bell began to pound from across town. A boy came running full tilt down Main Street, windmilling his arms. "Sheriff! Sheriff Barlow's been shot." Everything changed at once. Cobb whipped around. Pike's face emptied so fast it might have been honest surprise if Silas had not seen the calculation arrive one heartbeat later. Nell's hand flew to her mouth. The crowd that had gathered for church fire and gossip now broke toward the jailhouse in a single frightened rush. Silas stood in the middle of it with soot on his face, blood on his sleeve, his gun on the ground, and Tom Barlow dying behind him. There are moments when a man can still leave. They are rarely big. Usually they are quiet as a gate left swinging in the dark. Silas could have gone then, everyone looking elsewhere. His mare hitched by the side lane, pages warm against his ribs, a ridge line westward, and a night wide enough to disappear into. Instead he bent, picked up his revolver, and followed the running crowd toward the jailhouse, straight into the teeth of the thing he had once survived by abandoning. That was the moment the road behind him closed. Tom Barlow died before midnight. Cobb Renner swore he found the old man still breathing and Silas's boot prints below the rear window. Pike swore he had warned the town trouble would follow the moment Silas crossed back in. Half the people in Morrow Creek believed exactly as much as fear required. The other half believed nothing clearly, which in a crisis can be just as useful to a liar. Nell opened the telegraph office after dark and locked the front door behind Silas, while Joey slept under the sorting table with a folded coat for a pillow. Rain never came to Morrow Creek when it was wanted, but that night the heat broke into a dry wind that worried the window glass and carried ash smell from the churchyard all along Main. Silas stood near the stove, coat off, while Nell cleaned the crease in his upper arm with boiled water gone tepid. She worked without fuss. Her hands had learned steadiness from years of handling telegrams that broke people open in one sentence. "You should have left," she said. "I nearly did. But you didn't." "No." She wound the bandage tight enough to sting. That was either brave or foolish. Silas watched her knot the cloth. Morrow Creek always did have trouble telling the difference. A faint breath escaped her. Not a laugh. Something more tired. She moved away to wring blood from the rag into a basin. The room smelled of soap, hot metal, and the lemon oil she used on the counter. It struck him then with an ache he had not expected. How much of a life could be contained in ordinary smells? "You hid something under Joey's hat," she said without turning. Silas drew the wax packet from inside his shirt and laid it on the counter between them. Nell stared at it. "Tom found proof. He found enough. Enough to clear you. Enough to stop Pike, if we're careful." She looked up then, and he saw the old shame rise in her face before she had time to tamp it down. 14 years earlier, she had told the town she saw Silas ride behind the bank at dusk on the day of the robbery. It had been true. She had not seen that he was chasing the real thieves. Pike had frightened her father with a note called due and frightened her with worse. A woman alone with sick parents in a town owned by one man learned quickly what fear could purchase. "I said words that helped send you away," she said. "You said what Pike cornered you into saying. I still said them." Silas leaned a hip against the counter. "You also just helped keep these out of his hands." She pressed the heels of both palms against the wood as if grounding herself. "That doesn't balance it." "No," he said. "I don't reckon it does." The hurt of that seemed, oddly, to steady her more than comfort would have done. She nodded once and unwrapped the pages. Figures, ditch maps, mortgage transfers, Tom's cramped notes in the margins. Names of hired riders paid cash from Pike's private account, including Cobb Renner twice over on the week of the old robbery and again last month for something marked Southgate. "What's Southgate?" she asked. Silas studied the line item. "Emergency spillgate at the reservoir above town. If the main sluice jams, Southgate opens to carry excess water around the lower street." Nell's brow furrowed. Why pay men their last month? Because Pike doesn't spend money on things he already owns. Joey rolled in his sleep and murmured. Nell went to lay a blanket over him, and when she straightened the lamplight, caught the silver at her temples. He remembered a younger version of that same motion, in the old dance hall one winter when snow had shut the roads and everyone pretended music could hold loneliness off till dawn. He had almost asked her then, That was the kind of almost that can sit inside a man for years without rotting. From outside came boot steps on the boardwalk. Both of them froze. A fist struck the door. Telegraph closed. Cobb Renner's voice. Nell folded the top page over the rest in one motion and slid the packet beneath the false floor of the parcel scale. Yes. We need to search. For what? For a fugitive. Silas's hand dropped to the butt of his revolver. Nell's face did not change. Then search in the morning with a warrant. I've got a child asleep in here. A pause. Cobb never liked witnesses. You always did like broken things, he said through the door. Nell's chin lifted. And you always did mistake me for frightened. His boots lingered another moment, then moved on. Only when the sound had gone did Joey sit up under the table, wide awake now and holding something in both hands. I seen who shot the church, he whispered. Nell knelt so fast her skirt brushed the floor. Joey. The boy's lower lip trembled, but he kept talking. It was Mr. Pike's red-haired rider, the one with the bitten ear. He lit the stuff by the side door and then ran to the graves. Silas exchanged a look with Nell. Amos Vale, one of Pike's foremen, a man with the habit of chewing tobacco so hard it deformed his own face. Did anyone else see? Silas asked. Joey shook his head. He saw me by the pump. Nell shut her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, the decision was already there. Then Joey can't stay with me tonight. Silas knew why. Telegrapher's office had 3 windows and 1 door, none of them worth much against determined men. He goes to Mrs. Crow's, Silas said. No. First place they'd ask. There's a lined shack above Miller Draw that belonged to my husband's brother. Nobody uses it now. Silas nodded. I'll take him. Nell looked at him, startled by the certainty. You're the one they want, she said. Exactly. He checked the cylinder. 4 rounds left. Nell saw him count them. That enough? It'll have to be. She wrapped bread, cold ham, and a small jar of peaches in a cloth bundle, while Joey pulled his boots on with clumsy fingers. When she handed the food over, her knuckles brushed Silas's wrist. The contact was so brief it might have been accidental if not for the way neither of them looked up at once. At the back door she stopped him. Wind pushed loose hair across her cheek. Tom asked you here because he trusted what kind of man you were when no one was looking. Silas settled Joey onto the mare ahead of his saddle. Tom always did think well beyond evidence. Nell's mouth gave the smallest, saddest turn. Then let me offer some. A lie can fill a whole town faster than water if folks are thirsty enough. Silas held her eyes a moment. That line sat between them with the weight of experience, not cleverness. Then he nodded and rode out the alley behind the office into the dark. He got Joey to the line shack an hour before dawn and doubled back on foot through the mesquite wash, while the boys slept inside wrapped in 2 old army blankets. Coyotes called somewhere west, thin and lonely. The stars over Morrow Creek had the clean, cruel brightness of places too dry to forget the sky. By first light Silas was under the freight platform behind the depot, watching Pike's town come awake. Wagons came in from the south farms one by one, not with produce, but with whole families perched atop bedding, tool chests, and chicken crates. Pike's notices had gone out 3 days earlier. Notes due, claims contested, water usage to be reviewed by the county receiver at noon. Men stood beside their teams holding hats in both hands. Women kept children close and faces hard. Nothing in the world makes ordinary folks quieter than paperwork backed by guns. Pike had both. By 8 o'clock, Cobb Renner's deputies had taken positions along Main Street. 2 at the bank, 2 by the courthouse porch, another pair near the livery. Amos Vale, bitten ear red as raw meat, moved among them with a shotgun broken over his arm and the bored look of a man hoping for trouble so he could stop pretending to deserve pay. Silas slipped from shade to shade until he reached the alley behind Mrs. Crow's store, where Nell was loading telegram forms into a satchel. I sent wires before dawn, she said. State Water Office in Cheyenne. Circuit Clerk in Laramie. Pastor Leet's brother at the Casper paper. Whether any of them answer before Pike owns the county is another question. Receivers here yet? Just arrived. Name of Hollis Reed. Thin man, spectacles, sunburned neck. Looks like he apologizes to furniture. Silas almost smiled. Good. Apologetic men usually listen before they decide. Nell searched his face. Joey's safe. He's safe. She breathed out. Then what now? Silas showed her the copied pages and Tom's notes. Not enough without a witness or the original book. Pike'll call it forgery. Can Joey identify Amos? He can, but I won't drag a boy in front of Pike's men unless there's no other road. Nell glanced toward the street where a farmer's wife was trying to hush a baby already overhot and frightened. There may be no other road. Silas followed her gaze. His chest tightened. This was what Tom meant. Not the town at its loudest and ugliest. The town at its smallest. Families with all they owned packed onto wagons because a rich man had learned to use signatures the way rougher men used knives. A door banged open across the alley. Mrs. Crow, wiry as fencing wire and twice as sharp, stepped out with a crate of canned peaches against one hip. "You two planning salvation back here," she said. "Or do I need to fetch chairs?" Nell stiffened. "Mrs. Crow." "Oh, hush." The old woman set the crate down. "I was on the porch 14 years ago. I remember what I did and did not throw. If you've got a way to stop Vernon Pike from feeding this town to his ledgers, you'd be a fool not to try it. If you need a place to hide a child, I did not hear that part." Silas studied her face. "Why tell us this now?" Mrs. Crow snorted. "Because old age makes cowards rude, not blind. And because Pike offered half what my store is worth if the ditch gets reassigned by month's end." She wiped her hands on her apron. "A woman can tell when a man means to buy her grief wholesale." She went back inside, leaving the crate and, somehow, a little more courage in the alley than had been there before. Nell said softly, "That's the first time she's looked me in the eye about that day." Silas tucked the papers back under his vest. Fear keeps its own books. By noon, the whole town had collected in front of the courthouse. Receiver Hollis Reed stood behind a folding table with 2 ledgers and a government seal box. Sweat darkened his collar. Pike addressed the crowd from the top step, smooth and unhurried. "Speaking of necessary hardship, delinquent notes, temporary reassignment of South Ditch control to ensure efficiency and long-term prosperity." He talked the way men do when they need theft to sound like weather. Silas watched from the shade of the barber awning while Nell moved along the edge of the crowd, passing messages hand to hand. Pastor Leet touched his hat to her and drifted closer to the table. Mrs. Crow came with a rolled parasol and a face full of open contempt. Ed Barlow brought 3 farmers who had never once in their lives enjoyed public conflict. Small loyalties. Quiet ones. The kind that matter because they cost something. Pike began calling names. Each debtor stepped forward, hat in hand, to hear terms already decided. Then Hollis Reed frowned down at a mortgage paper and adjusted his spectacles. "Mr. Pike, this legal description references South Ditch Parcel A under your private holding, but the territorial survey attached here lists municipal reserve." Pike smiled. "Clerical overlap. Nothing significant. Overlap controls water access for 57 downstream acres, which my office has maintained at personal expense for years." Silas saw Pike's left thumb rub his watch chain once. First tell of irritation. Nell eased closer to him through the crowd. "Can you stop this without showing yourself?" "No." "Then when?" Silas looked up the street. Cobb Renner was watching the crowd, not the papers. Amos Vale had drifted away from the courthouse toward the bank alley. Men only do that in the middle of a public proceeding when the real work is happening elsewhere. "Now," Silas said, and stepped out. The crowd parted on recognition before it parted on intent. He walked to the bottom of the courthouse steps and stopped beneath Pike's shadow. "Might help your receiver if he had the rest of the figures," Silas said. The whole street seemed to hold breath. Cobb's hand went to his gun. "You're under arrest for Sheriff Barlow's murder." Silas kept his eyes on Pike. Interesting. Seeing as Pike's rider burned a church to get these pages before Tom was cold. He laid the copied sheets on the table in front of Hollis Reed. The receiver stared, then snatched them up as if paper might bruise less for moving quick. Pike's voice stayed pleasant. "A fugitive presents stolen documents, and we are meant to call it evidence." Nell came to stand beside Silas. Not behind him. Beside. "I sent telegrams on these figures at dawn," she said. "To Cheyenne and Laramie. Timestamps are in my office. If they're forged, then Tom Barlow and I chose a foolish morning to begin." Murmurs moved through the crowd. Cobb mounted the steps 2 at a time. "That's enough. Both of you." A shot rang out from the bank alley. Not at Silas. At the courthouse clock face above them. Glass burst down in a bright spray. Horses screamed. People dropped. Hollis Reed ducked so fast he toppled the chair. Amos Vale came running from the alley yelling. "Reservoir gates blown. South Wash is flooding." Every head turned south. Silas did not. He looked straight at Pike and saw it there, just for an instant. Satisfaction. Then the screaming started in earnest from the lower end of town. That is the kind of moment I want you to sit with for a heartbeat, because this is where a story stops being about what a person suffered and becomes about what they choose while suffering is still fresh in them. Have you ever known, before anyone spoke it aloud, that the harder road was already yours simply because you would not be able to live inside yourself if you took the easy one? Silas ran before the question finished echoing in him. The south end of Morrow Creek lay below the reservoir channel where the emergency spill gate fed runoff into a broad wash during spring melt. Pike had spent weeks claiming rot in the gate timbers. Now muddy water was knifing through the ditch with far too much force for an accident, chewing fence posts out by the roots and lifting hen coops whole into the current. Not enough yet to wipe out the lower street. Enough to terrify everyone into believing Pike's argument that only he could manage the town's water. But as Silas sprinted down the slope past the Cooper's yard, he saw the truth at once. This was not a broken gate. This was a measured release. A warning flood. Amos had fired at the clock to create panic and buy time. The real danger was still above town. Nell caught up at the livery corner, breathless. "What is it?" "Demonstration," Silas said. "Pike wants folks scared before the signing." "You're sure?" He pointed at the flow. "Too clean. Too narrow. Somebody opened partway and shut it again." They cut through the back lots to the old pump road. Halfway there Silas found what he needed. Fresh wagon tracks with metal rim marks and powder grits scattered in the dust. "Blasting powder," he said. Nell's face drained. "At the reservoir?" He nodded. "If Pike can't steal the ditch by paper, he'll make the town beg him to rebuild it." They reached the lower draw where the road forked. One branch up to the reservoir, the other over the ridge toward Miller Draw. Silas stopped, so suddenly Nell nearly ran into him. "Joey," he said. She understood at once. If Pike's men had seen the boy or guessed he witnessed the church fire, the line shack was no longer safe. "I'll get him," she said. Silas shook his head. "Too exposed. You can't be in two places." "No, but I can put you where the truth lands hardest." He handed her Tom's copies. "Take these to Hollis read. Make him read them in public. Not Pike. The crowd. If I'm right, Pike's got men at the reservoir now and Cobb covering town. And if you're wrong, then I've spent what little grace I had left on a guess." Nell's eyes shone with anger and fear at once. "You don't get to say that like your life is small enough to gamble." For the first time in years, the word struck him where pride used to live. He looked away up the road, toward scrub pines and heat shimmer. "Go to Joey first," he said. "Then bring the boy and the papers to town. But keep off the main road." She grabbed his sleeve before he could move. "Silas." He turned. "When this is done, if it's done, don't disappear on me before I've had the chance to say what should have been said 14 years ago." The wind moved dust between them. Silas swallowed once. "Then I suppose I'll have to live long enough to hear it." He ran uphill. The reservoir sat in a bowl of stone and scrub above Morrow Creek, held by an earthen berm shored up with old timber cribbing from before Pike owned half the county. The emergency spill gate stood to the south, a heavy iron-framed slide controlled by a chain wheel and a rusted clevis pin big as a man's thumb. Silas had helped maintain it when he wore the badge, back when public work was still public enough for hands instead of accounting. By the time he reached the crest, he was on his knees from the climb, and the wound in his arm was wet again. Below him, 3 horses were tied in the shade. A powder wagon stood near the spillgate trestle. Amos Vale was uncoiling fuse line. Cobb Renner had a rifle across his knees and was watching the lower trail. Vernon Pike himself stood in the shade of the gatehouse with his coat off and his vest unbuttoned, as comfortable as a man arranging hay delivery. Silas counted heads. For visible, maybe 5. He drew and moved low through sage, the bitter smell of crushed leaves rising around him. At 30 yards, he saw something else half hidden under the wagon tarp. Ledgers. Several. Pike wasn't only planning destruction. He was moving records, probably originals, out of town during the chaos. Silas slid behind a limestone outcrop and watched Cobb spit over the rail. Renner's profile gave him back 14 years in one hot rush. The side window at the bank, the angle Tom could never make fit with Silas's position in the street. Not until the ledger. Not until now. A sound from behind. Hoofbeats, hard and near. He turned with the gun already up. Nell came over the rise on Silas's mare with Joey in front of her, Hollis Reed on a mule behind, and Ed Barlow panting on foot with a shotgun and more loyalty than sense. Silas cursed under his breath and stood. Cobb saw them instantly. There. Gunfire broke the afternoon into pieces. Silas dropped Amos with the first shot through the shoulder. Cobb's rifle answered and took a bite out of the rock by Hollis Reed's knee. Joey screamed. Nell hauled the boy off the mare and shoved him behind the mule. Ed Barlow fired both barrels too early and lost all surprise for nothing but smoke. Pike ran for the gatehouse. Silas hit the wagon tongue, rolled beneath it, and fired again at Renner's boots. One man shouted from the far side of the trestle and toppled into the wash. Powder sacks split where bullets struck, throwing up dirty yellow puffs that stung the air with sulfur. Stay down, Silas shouted. Nell ignored him and dragged Hollis Reed toward the stone retaining wall where they could not be flanked from the right. Joey crawled after them on elbows, face gray with dust. The mule bolted. The mare reared against her lead rope, eyes wild. Cobb shifted position with the practiced cruelty of a man who had hunted frightened people before. He fired low, toward where Joey's legs trailed from cover. Silas snapped a shot so close past Renner's cheek it shaved bark off the post behind him. Cobb ducked back, swearing. 3 rounds left. Nell glanced up from behind the wall. Silas pointed at Hollis's satchel where the copied pages were stuffed. Read them if I tell you. Hollis Reed looked as though he would rather have been buried politely than shot publicly, but he nodded. Pike's voice came from the gatehouse. Rourke, you cannot win this with theatrics. Silas answered without taking his eyes off the trestle. Funny, that's what men call truth when it arrives late. Pike laughed once. Truth? This town wanted you gone before I opened my mouth. All I ever did was give fear a direction. The words landed harder than bullets because they were ugly and nearly true. Then Cobb shouted from the far side. He's moving. Silas turned and saw Amos Vale, not dead after all, crawling one-handed toward the fuse line. 2 rounds. Silas fired. Amos's hand jerked away from the cord and went still. A second shot hit Silas high in the side and spun him against the wagon wheel. For a moment, all the world went white and hollow. He tasted iron. Somewhere far off Nell was yelling his name, but it came thin and stretched, like hearing through water. He pressed a hand to his ribs. Blood, hot and slick. 1 round left. In that hard, bright instant, lying in sulfur dust with his own blood soaking his shirt, he saw the whole shape of Pike's plan. Not flood. Not exactly. Blow the spillgate supports with enough force, and the gate would jam half open while the main reservoir held. South Wash would cut straight through the lower street for weeks. Farms would dry. Town businesses would fail. Pike would ride in with private crews and private credit and own everything still standing by winter. Pike stepped out of the gatehouse holding a lantern in one hand and the loose end of the fuse in the other. Call him off, Nell shouted to Hollis Reed. As if government seals had ever stopped men like this fast enough. Pike smiled down at them all. Receiver, I do hope you're observing the lengths to which desperate men will go when confronted by lawful debt. Silas pushed himself to one knee. The reservoir wind had picked up, warm from the rocks, carrying alkali and old water. Pike stood partly hidden behind the gate frame. A chest shot might hit iron. A miss would finish them. And even if he killed Pike outright, the fuse would still burn once lit. The powder wagon sat too near. The clevis pin that controlled the emergency drop lay 15 feet left of Pike's shoulder, half-rusted, narrow as a finger joint. It was not a shot any smart man took on one lung with blood running down his side. Pike lifted the lantern toward the fuse. Silas drew breath that felt lined with nails and brought the front side up anyway. The world narrowed the way it always had when he was at his best. Wind quartering right. Distance just under 30. Iron glare. Blood loss making the sight swim. He thought of all the years he had spent believing skill was only useful for ending things. He thought of Tom Barlow saying a town was still a town. He thought of Nell's hand brushing his wrist over a cloth bundle of bread in the dark. Pike touched flame to the fuse. Silas fired at the pin. The shot rang flat across the basin. For one terrible fraction of a second, nothing changed. Then the clevis pin sheared free and the emergency drop slammed open with a groan like old timber waking. A sheet of pent water roared down the south sluice, white and furious, hit the trestle, and took the lit fuse clean off the planks. It drowned the flame, smashed the powder wagon sideways, and flung Vernon Pike backward into the mud up to his waist. The rush carried ledgers, powder sacks, boots, curses, and half the gatehouse porch in one roaring sweep toward the spilled trench, but it did not strike the lower street. The drop channel had been built for precisely this work before greed ever touched it. Silas sagged against the wheel while the basin filled with the pounding thunder of saved water. When the spray thinned, Cobb Renner was on his knees in the mud, rifle gone, one arm pinned under broken timber. Pike was trying to stand and failing. Hollis Reed, spectacles crooked and face splattered, stumbled forward clutching the copied pages to his chest like scripture. Nell came out from behind the wall with Joey beside her. The boy was shaking. He looked at Amos Vale floating face down near the rocks, then at Pike, then at the whole ruined arrangement laid bare in mud and running water. "That's him," Joey said, voice small but carrying. "That's the man what burned the church. Mr. Pike paid him. I heard it by the pump." Pike rounded on him, spitting water. "You little." "Careful," Nell said. No one in Morrow Creek had heard that tone from her in years. It stopped even Pike. She stepped up onto the trestle beside Hollis Reed, wind plucking at the edges of her dress, and held Tom Barlow's pages high so the ink showed dark and wet in the afternoon light. "Read them," she told Hollis. He swallowed. Here, she said, "where every man can hear what nearly killed him." So Hollis Reed read, not boldly, not beautifully, but clearly enough. Water rights surveys, private payments, Renner's name beside cash disbursements the week Milo died. Amos Vale paid for church fire. Powder ordered to Southgate under Pike Ranch invoice. Each line plain as fence wire. Each figure exactly the sort of dull detail liars never bother to invent because they underestimate how completely a fact can finish them. And then, because the day had not yet done peeling back old harm, Silas saw it in the ledger margin on the final page Tom had copied but not yet shown him. Shot from west window. Not Rourke's angle. Renner admitted after whiskey. Paid silence. Cobb saw Silas reading, and his face changed. The swagger drained first. Then the anger. What remained was smaller and meaner and very close to fear. "I didn't kill Milo on purpose," he said to nobody and everybody. He moved. Pike turned on him with naked contempt. "You useless animal. That did it." Renner laughed once, ragged and broken. "You promised it'd wash clean." He started talking after that like a burst grain sack spills. Fast, ugly, impossible to gather back. The bank window. Pike in the alley. The money moved after dark. Tom nearly finding out. The note on Nell's father's place. Silas marked for blame because people already admired him enough to envy him. All of it. Pike tried to interrupt twice. No one listened. There are losses a man feels long before the handcuffs come. Power leaving a room is one of them. Ed Barlow limped up the trestle with his empty shotgun and stood over Pike, breathing hard. "Tom should have seen this," he said. Pike looked from face to face and found nothing left he could purchase. Not fear, not admiration, not even practical silence. Just mud on his coat and water dripping from his watch chain. By dusk, they had him in the old jail, the same cell Silas should have occupied 14 years earlier if the town had chosen law over panic. Cobb went into the next one. Hollis Reed sealed the ledgers. Pastor Leet rang the surviving church bell by hand with a rope because the tower still smelled of smoke and ash but had not fallen. Down on Main Street, men reopened the ditch checks, and women went house to house counting who had taken damage and who had space to share a bedroll. Silas nearly fainted when the noise was over. Nell caught him before pride could make a performance of it. She got his arm over her shoulders and half-walked, half-dragged him to the back room of the telegraph office where the lamp threw a low amber circle across the washstand, and the air still held soap and lemon oil. She cut his shirt away from the wound in his side, hands steady till they touched blood, and then not quite. "It went through," she said after a moment. "You stubborn devil." He sank onto the cot. Has been said. Outside, wheels rattled. Men called to one another in tired voices. The town was mending itself by inches. Nell stitched him while he bit down on a folded cloth and watched the ceiling blur in and out. When she finished, she washed the blood from her hands in the basin and stood with her back to him, so long he thought perhaps she meant to cry privately and was determined to be granted the courtesy. Instead, she reached into the drawer of the parcel desk and brought out a small tin star, dulled with years, one point bent slightly inward. Tom's old marshal badge. He kept it after they took it from your vest, she said. Gave it to me the winter after. Told me to return it when I found enough courage to hand back at least one thing my silence helped steal. Silas looked at the badge in her palm and did not lift his hand. Tom had a talent for long errands. Nell sat beside him on the cot. The mattress dipped under her weight. Not much, just enough to remind him how long it had been since another person sat close, without wanting anything taken or traded. I married after you left, she said. You know that. I heard. He was a decent man. Kind in the practical ways that matter. He died before the second frost 5 years ago. Fever. I sat with him 3 nights, and kept thinking that grief feels less like breaking than like being slowly hollowed. After that I told myself surviving was enough. Useful. Respectable. I made a life out of not asking for more. Silas stared at his hands. There were powder burns on 2 knuckles, church soot still caught in the lines of his skin. I made a life out of leaving first. She turned the badge over between thumb and finger. Did it help? He thought about the cabins, camps, bunkhouses, and borrowed rooms of the last 14 years. The meals eaten facing doors. The habit of never unpacking fully. The way loneliness can become so orderly a man mistakes it for peace. No, he said. Now let that sit. Then she placed the badge beside him on the blanket, not pinning it on, not asking him to take it up before he was ready, just setting it within reach. I should have told the truth louder, she said. Even frightened. Silas shook his head. And I should have stayed and fought cleaner. We can cut ourselves to ribbons on should have. She looked down. You saved a town that didn't deserve your return. He thought about Joey under the table. Mrs. Crow with her peaches and contempt. Ed Barlow standing over Pike in the mud with Tom's name in his mouth. Deserve had very little to do with most saving. After a long while he said, some people think being needed is the same as being loved. It isn't. Loved is when they stay after the danger passes. Nell closed her eyes briefly, as if the words had found the tender place directly without asking permission of any harder part first. When she opened them, they were wet and clear. I'm here, she said. So am I. If that one reached somewhere tender in you, you are not alone. Leave a like, subscribe, and stay close, because these are the moments folks come seeking whether they admit it or not. The ones that remind us a hard world has not managed to beat all the gentleness out of us. A knock came at the back door. Mrs. Crow entered with broth, bandages, and the expression of a woman refusing to be sentimental even while carrying proof she already was. Joey peeked around her skirt, ear pinched between nervous fingers. Brought supper, she said. Then, eyeing Silas. Also brought the boy who won't sleep until he sees for himself you did not go and die after all that commotion. Joey stepped forward and held out Silas's revolver in both hands. Mr. Reed cleaned it, he said. There's just the empty chamber where the last one was. Silas took the gun carefully. Thank you. The boy's gaze fell to the badge on the blanket. Then to Nell. Then back to Silas. He understood more than adults like to think children did. You gonna wear it again? Joey asked. Silas looked at the bent tin star, then at Nell. He could have pinned it on. The town would not have objected tonight. After everything, no one would have denied him that claim. Instead, he closed his hand over the badge and held it out to Joey. Not mine anymore, he said. Maybe one day if you grow into a man who asks 2 questions before one accusation, you'll earn a better one than this. Joey stared, then accepted it with both hands as though it might crumble. Mrs. Crow saw. Nell saw. Neither said a word. But something in the room shifted toward respect too deep for applause. Warmth came into that back room then, not from the stove, not from the broth steaming in chipped bowls, but from the simple fact that nobody left when it would have been easiest. Morrow Creek spent the next week discovering how quickly a town can change once the man profiting from its fear loses the means to collect. Hollis Reed voided Pike's South Ditch claim before sunset the following day. Telegraph answers came in from Cheyenne confirming irregularities under investigation for months. Cobb Renner signed a full confession in exchange for a chance at mercy no one particularly believed would be generous. Vernon Pike, stripped of authority piece by his own records, stopped speaking smooth and started speaking true, which was uglier and much less effective. People came to the telegraph office in ones and twos to say things to Silas they should perhaps have said years earlier. Some apologized plain. Some circled the matter like skittish horses and ended up thanking him for saving the town instead, which was not the same thing but counted as effort. Silas accepted what was offered and did not reach for what was not. Restraint, he had learned, can be its own kind of dignity when the past finally stumbles back asking to be judged. He helped rebuild the church ladder, rehung a gate on the Crow property, showed Hollis Reed where the spilled trestle timber had to be replaced before spring. He slept 2 nights at the hotel, one in the jailhouse when rain threatened the evidence room roof, and by the 4th night, he found his bedroll laid unasked on the telegraph office porch where the evening breeze moved cooler through the cottonwoods. Nell said nothing about it. Neither did he. There are invitations mature hearts understand without requiring ceremony. By the time the first proper Sunday came round, the town had settled enough for quiet to feel believable again. Pastor Leet preached under a patched ceiling that God sometimes sends back the stone people rejected because carpentry is easier to understand than grace. Mrs. Crow said afterward that it was the first sermon in 20 years with enough nerve to be worth the heat. Joey spent the service turning the bent tin star over in his pocket till his aunt finally pinched his ear. That evening Silas stood on the porch watching Nell light the office lamp. The glass chimed softly as she set it down. Out in the street, children chased each other around a watering trough newly brimming from the saved reservoir. Somebody at the hotel piano was picking out a tune with more optimism than skill. "You could still go," Nell said without looking up. Silas leaned one shoulder against the post. "Could, but..." He watched Joey walk past with 2 peaches in his hands, and one of them clearly intended for Mrs. Crow despite his wanting both. He watched Ed Barlow pause to straighten a crooked hitch sign outside the mercantile, though it was no business of his. He watched Hollis Reed, now less apologetic, remove his coat and help unload lumber because government authority turns out to carry better when it can also lift. Silas said, "Maybe home is just the place that quits asking you to prove you should have stayed." Nell turned then. The lamp threw gold into her eyes. "Then I hope you'll allow this place to improve its manners." Months later, when the ditch grass had come back green along the south channel, and the church tower wore new shingles pale as fresh bread, people still told the story of the shot at the reservoir, though no 2 of them agreed on the distance. What lasted better than the story was the shape of the days after. Joey took to sweeping the telegraph porch before breakfast because he had decided order was a virtue. Mrs. Crow kept a dish of peppermints by the till and denied enjoying children. Hollis Reed returned east but wrote twice about grant money for a proper stone spillgate. And on cool evenings, when the sun went down red behind the ridge and the whole town smelled of damp earth and coffee, Silas would sit beside Nell on the porch with his hat tipped back, listening to the creek move where water had no business sounding so much like forgiveness. Below the Morrow Creek settled into evening under the cottonwoods, the office lamp shining warm behind the window and a second cup already waiting on the rail beside his hand. And if you ride with me next time, I'll tell you about the widow who traded her last wedding ring for a map no honest man would touch, and the half-blind tracker who agreed to lead her anyway. Till then, keep the lamp low and your heart open tonight.